There's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters this podcast was recorded on. It's Saturday, July 13th, 2024, in Bethel Park, Pennsylvania. And Thomas Crooks has called in sick to work. "I have something to do," he tells his boss, insisting he'll be back tomorrow. He drives to his local shop and picks up some ammunition and a ladder before packing his car with his dad's registered AR-15 style rifle, 2 radio-controlled homemade bombs, a bulletproof vest, and 3 fully loaded magazines. Thomas doesn't look like an assassin. The averagely built 20-year-old comes from a middle-class neighbourhood and still lives with his parents, Mary and Matthew. But today, he has big plans. After driving an hour north to the town of Butler, he disappears into a crowd of red and white. Men, women and children are excitedly waiting for a rally to start. They're carrying American flags and hats that read, "Make America Great Again." Thomas is out of place and people notice, but they're not alarmed enough to raise any major alarms. He isn't stopped as he quietly climbs onto a nearby roof and raises his dad's rifle. Tonight, he's going to try and assassinate the former President of America, Donald Trump, and change the course of history forever. I'm Gemma Barth, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamamia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them.
Take a look at what happened.
Thomas Crooks managed to send 8 bullets flying in 26 seconds before he was shot dead by Secret Service agents. He missed his target, Donald Trump, but managed to draw blood, grazing the former president's right ear with a bullet. He did kill someone though, and injured 2 others, with the assassination attack exploding across world media moments after it happened. America has lost 4 presidents to assassinations. 4 more have escaped attempted hits. It's been 43 years since the most recent attack. Ronald Reagan was seriously wounded by a revolver bullet while giving a speech in Washington in 1981. So what does an assassination attempt look like in 2024? How did Thomas Crooks get as far as he did? And were there any signs that the Secret Service missed? Matt Bevan is a reporter for the ABC who specialises in US politics. He hosts a podcast called If You're Listening. Now, as more details emerge, we're delving into the crime, the shooter, the aftermath, and the families forever changed by this attack. Matt joins us now. The American political system is very different to ours. I'd love you to set the scene a little bit about what this event in Pennsylvania for Trump was all about and where we were in the political landscape when this happened.
So this was a campaign rally for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has won the Republican primary process, so that's how they select who their party's candidate is going to be for the presidential election. Trump had already seen that off, and now he was in kind of a strange period between becoming the what they call presumptive nominee and becoming the candidate at the party's convention when they officially become the party's candidate and then campaign till the election in November with the full support of the Republican Party. So Donald Trump was sort of in this weird limbo period between those two things, but still holding regular campaign events and touring the United States. And this was a rally that was announced about a week before it happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, which is a small township about 50 minutes out of Pittsburgh, and very strong Trump country. This is a really strong Trump supporter base area. And so, you know, he was holding that rally to try and rev up his supporters in the crucial state of Pennsylvania. The election will potentially come down to who wins the state of Pennsylvania. And so it was a really important place for Donald Trump to visit. And so he was there doing his rally, which was supposed to start at 5 o'clock. And it had all been organised out there in the open with 2 cranes holding up a giant American flag above the stage, bleachers surrounding the stage so that supporters could be right up close to him. And, of course, the Secret Service in place to try and make sure that nothing like this shooting happens.
Let's talk a little bit more about the security preparations, because obviously for a nominee they're going to be big, but we've also got a former president. So I imagine they're even more stringent. Do you know what they would have looked like on that day?
The way it kind of works is there's sort of 3 security groups all working together to protect Donald Trump in this situation. You have the local police who are there to control the crowd, to control traffic, to look around the outer perimeter of the site and try and make sure that nothing suspicious happens. Then you have the Secret Service counter assault team. So these are snipers and trained shooters who arrive at the site beforehand, are there in position on top of buildings and around the stage in order to protect Trump if anything does happen. And then there's his personal Secret Service detail who travels with him. So they come with him to the site, and these are the people that jumped on top of him when the actual shooting happened. Their job is to stop Donald Trump from getting hit by bullets rather than trying to shoot back at whoever is shooting at Donald Trump. So their job is to put their body between a bullet and Donald Trump, whereas the counter-assault team are the ones who are supposed to, shoot the shooter. And so those are the 3 teams that were at play. There is significant reporting around the idea that Donald Trump had for some time been saying that his Secret Service protection was insufficient and that he needed more agents to be protecting him at his events, which, that certainly seems to be the case. But yes, so it was basically 3 groups working theoretically in concert with each other to try and make sure that something like this doesn't happen. But as we can discuss, there were multiple failures, not by the team with Trump, his personal detail that jumped on top of him. They did what they're supposed to do, but by the other groups who really should have been able to prevent this from happening because they saw and engaged with the shooter and multiple times between the shooter's arrival and when he actually started firing shots.
I'd love to do a little bit of a comparison just to kind of give us an idea. That sounds like a hell of a lot of security. How much would an Australian Prime Minister have around them at an event like that?
The thing is that we don't really have events like this where tens of thousands of people all come together in the open, outdoors for a big, rock concert style rally event. This is kind of an American thing that doesn't really happen very often in Australia. I've interacted with the Prime Minister's protective detail from time to time. They are scary, large people in business suits who are very intimidating. When I was just a quite young journalist, Julia Gillard came to the radio station that I was working at, the ABC in Newcastle, to be interviewed, and with her AFP protective detail, and they sort of came in and they filled the building. There was 6, 7 of them standing around in rather a small radio station. And at one point, the presenter who was interviewing Julia Gillard asked me to grab him a cup of tea, and so I went and got a cup of tea and then was bringing it into the studio, and one of the AFP agents jumped in front of me and said, "Who's that for? Is that for the Prime Minister?" And I went, "No, it's for it's not for her. I can make her one if you want." Anyway, they're large, intimidating people. But the key thing that you've got to remember is, say that hypothetically you are an Australian person who wants to shoot at a Prime Minister. Where are you going to find a gun that can shoot at the range that Thomas Matthew Crooks, he was firing from a distance of 135 metres. For a trained marksman and for someone with a long-range rifle, that's not a particularly difficult shot. But in Australia, where are you going to find a gun that can shoot accurately at that range? So much of the things that protect our prime ministers and our politicians are at the societal level, whereby we just don't have the weaponry around to pull off a shooting like this. So it's just far less likely in Australia simply due to the fact that you don't have millions of long-range rifles sitting around in people's cupboards. So the stakes are much higher in the United States, and the job is much more difficult for the Secret Service simply due to the prevalence of high-powered, long-range weaponry in American society.
We've all seen the footage or the photo of Trump holding his fist in the air with his Secret Service around him. But can you talk us through exactly what happened? It was just after 6 p.m. Trump gets onto the stage at this Pennsylvania rally.
Yeah, Donald Trump was more than an hour late for his event. He was supposed to be speaking just after 5 o'clock, but he didn't arrive until 6:05. He drove up. His motorcade came right up very close to the stage. He walked up onto the stage. Lee Greenwood's God Bless the USA song that he plays every time he comes on the stage played. He walks around pumping his fists, waving at the crowd, that kind of thing. And then he starts speaking, and he was only speaking for about 5 minutes before the shots started being fired. But one of the interesting things that Donald Trump says about the reason that the shooting was unsuccessful is there were big screens, big LED TV screens surrounding the stage. And Donald Trump, as he was speaking, he speaks off the cuff a lot. He varies from his script. He starts talking about this chart of illegal immigration into the United States that he apparently loves to look at because it indicates that there has been an increase in the number of irregular migrants coming into the United States since he left office. So he sort of asks his team, can you put this chart up on the big screen? They do. And then he's sort of turning his head towards the big screen on the side of the stage and directing his audience to have a look at the chart, and he's talking about the chart and that kind of thing. He was sort of looking straight at the crowd, straight at the camera, and then he turns his head to the side to look at the chart, and that was when the first bullet flies past his head, seemingly clips his right ear, just missing, we're talking millimetres away from hitting him in the head, and then carries on beyond him and into the bleachers that were sort of at stage left from his perspective and hits people in the crowd. And Donald Trump says it was only because of this chart and the fact that he was looking at it at the time and just turned his head towards the chart on the big screen that he was saved from being shot. But yes, from Trump's perspective, he arrived, spoke for 5 minutes, turned his head towards the chart, felt a pain in his ear, and then dropped to the ground and was covered by Secret Service agents who, he says, tackled him so hard that his shoes came off. He then gets to his feet after the Secret Service says that the shooter has been taken down. It was 26 seconds from the first shot being fired to the shooter being shot by the Secret Service. And so about a minute after the shooting, Donald Trump is brought to his feet by the Secret Service. He asks them to wait while he puts his shoes back on. And as they start to escort him off the stage, he just asks them to wait one more time, and then he puts his fist in the air, pumps his fist, and mouths the word fight 3 times. He says that he shouted the word fight 3 times. He didn't. The microphone was right next to him, and we heard him say, wait, 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 I need to get my shoes, and blah, 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 blah. But when he's actually saying fight, no noise is coming out of his mouth. He's mouthing the word fight. I'm not sure why he was mouthing it and not shouting it.
Which is a bizarre detail.
Anyway, one of the mysteries of Donald Trump.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Gemma Barth. Up next, we discuss what could possibly drive a 20-year-old kitchen worker to carry out an assassination attempt on a former president of the United States. The assassination attempt on Trump was obviously unsuccessful, but the shooter did kill someone and really critically injure two others. What do we know about the people that were killed and hurt?
So looking from the shooter's perspective, straight past Trump, there was, a crowd. And so the 3 shots that we believe the shooter fired went into that crowd behind Trump and hit 3 people, one of whom was a retired firefighter, now a volunteer firefighter named Corey Comprator, who was reportedly putting his body in between the shooter and his family and was hit in the head and killed. And 2 other people were injured. Large numbers of the crowd went to the aid of those people. You can see video of a lot of crowd members who were interviewed by the media afterwards with blood on their clothes while they tried to help the people who had been hit. All of them were men, and Corey Comprator was the man who was hit in the head and killed.
The first obvious question is, how did this happen? Which we've obviously touched on a little bit. But I want to start with the many witnesses, because lots of people saw Thomas before he shot at the former president. Let's start with the crowd coming in early and Thomas milling around everyone. What did witnesses see?
He was spotted many times. He was first identified by the authorities as a person of interest at 5:10. So that is 1 hour and 1 minute before the first shot was fired. He entered the secure area, so that's going through the metal detectors. He was carrying a rangefinder. So a rangefinder is sort of looks like a little telescope that you look through and it fires like a laser, and then the laser bounces back and then it sort of calculates the distance of whatever you're pointing the rangefinder at. Now, this is used by lots of people for lots of different reasons. Surveyors, people playing golf often will use a rangefinder to see how far away the tee is, but also by, potential shooters figuring out how far away various things are from where they're standing in order to calculate the angle of their shot. So he had a rangefinder on him and he was looking at things through it. He was spotted by the Secret Service snipers. So he's looking at them through his rangefinder and they look back at him through their scopes. And so they saw each other while they're on the ground and while he was sort of skulking around looking at things. And then we've all seen videos of the various rally goers witnessing him on the roof, seeing him having climbed up onto the roof with his gun and trying to alert authorities to his presence there. But what we now think is that authorities were very aware of the fact that he was up there. There's now been reporting in the Associated Press that says that the Butler County Sheriff, Michael Sloop, said that, in fact, a police officer tried to climb up onto the roof to figure out what this guy was doing. So another officer hoisted a police officer up to the edge of the roof, to the gutter area, where the police officer tried to pull himself up. The police officer saw Thomas Matthew Crooks with his gun. Thomas Matthew Crooks turned around, pointed the gun at the officer, at which point the officer dropped down back below the level of the gutter. He was dangling from the edge of the building, obviously, holding on with 2 hands, unable to get his own gun, obviously, to fire at Crooks. The officer then fell from the building, landed on the ground, and has severely injured their ankle. They're now walking around in a boot, so a significant injury to their ankle after falling 8 feet to the ground. So the police definitely knew he was there. Another extraordinary fact is that the building that Thomas Matthew Crooks climbed up on top of, was shooting from, was the staging position for the police. So the police were organising themselves inside the building. So they were certainly very aware of the fact that he was there. In fact, the Secret Service apparently spotted him on the roof 20 minutes before the shooting, I don't really understand how it's possible that they didn't at least warn Trump, get Trump off the stage. There must be some reason behind it. I certainly don't buy into the theory that there was some conspiracy by the Secret Service in order to allow someone to shoot at Trump. I don't buy that for a second, but it certainly seems like they were extremely aware of him being up there. The public knew that he was there. The rallygoers were shouting, trying to get someone to deal with him, but he was able to remain on the roof long enough for Trump to arrive, start his speech, and then fire 3 shots at him.
There's a lot of criticism out there against the Secret Service right now. Is that under investigation? Is that something we might find out more about?
Oh, yeah. I definitely think we'll find a lot more about it. There's a significant investigation going into it, looking into how this happened. What I'm telling you now is sort of scattered reports from the police, gave a little press conference and said this. The Secret Service issued a statement that said that. Witnesses said this, saw that. There will be an investigation where hundreds of people are interviewed and they get a really solid picture of who was where and who saw what at which time. And so, yeah, we will eventually get a clear picture of exactly how this could possibly have happened. But it is a failure by the Secret Service, obviously, by definition. But it'll be interesting to see exactly how they explain the fact that so many law enforcement officers saw a man on a roof 130 metres away from Donald Trump, which is certainly within rifle range, and didn't do anything about it.
You brought up the word conspiracy before.
Aha.
And very, very quickly after the shooting, we descended into many conspiracy holes. Were you expecting that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly the way that these things always go. It needn't be something as dramatic as a shooting to throw people in the United States into speculation about conspiracies. In fact, the first tweets I saw when I opened my phone on Sunday morning were tweets saying that Trump staged this. Trump organised this himself simply to create a scenario where he could be photographed pumping his fist in the air with blood on his ear. Even still, there's all these people who are demanding to know whether it was really a bullet that hit Trump in the ear, whether it was shrapnel from a teleprompter that was hit by a bullet or whatever. I don't really know why that matters. As far as I'm aware, it was a bullet that hit him in the ear. But even if it wasn't, he was being shot at and he was injured. I mean, does it really matter whether it was a bullet or shrapnel that hit him in the ear? He was being shot at by a man with a long-range rifle. So certainly something terrible happened to Donald Trump, something terrifying, and something that absolutely should not have been able to happen. And, of course, that's the source of so many other conspiracy theories, that the Secret Service deliberately ignored Thomas Crooks, or that he was somehow enabled by the Secret Service, or was inspired to do what he did by Joe Biden's rhetoric, talking about Donald Trump as a threat to democracy. You know, Donald Trump, in his speech to the Republican National Convention, decried the fact that Joe Biden was calling him an enemy of democracy. Donald Trump has very frequently described other politicians as enemies of the state. It's incredibly hypocritical for Donald Trump to blame violent rhetoric for what happened to him, given that he himself uses violent rhetoric and has done for his entire political career.
We can scoff at these conspiracy theories, and they do get quite wild. I've seen some out there saying a 1992 movie predicted the shooting, or the Bible predicted it. It just goes further and further into insane theories. But these theories can be really dangerous, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a really concerning quirk of American culture, whereby so many Americans assume that they are being swindled, that the truth of any scenario is being hidden from them, that the other team, whoever they may be, are trying to trick them or lying to them, or things are not as they seem. This has been the case we explored in last week's episode of If You're Listening, the way that conspiracy theories emerged immediately and gained pace after the John F. Kennedy assassination in 1963. The conspiracy began because there were things missing from the official report into what happened that day with the shooting of John F. Kennedy and with the shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald. Things weren't in the report. Things were kept out of the report by the CIA, by the FBI, by the Secret Service. And that's actually true. The American government did lie to the investigators, but not about the shooting. They tried to cover up other things that they didn't want to get dragged out into the public. For example, assassination attempts on Fidel Castro or other global leaders, attempts to create pretext for a war with Cuba. They thought all these embarrassing things may come out in the public if the investigators got a hold of that information and went down that rabbit hole. The CIA is basically saying, well, he did do it. He did act alone. We had nothing to do with it. Why do we have to let all our dirty laundry out? So they really did engage in a cover-up, not about the shooting itself, but they did engage in a cover-up. And wherever there is a cover-up, you're going to have people going, well, why did you cover it up? What is it that you're covering up? And that is really where conspiracy theories begin. And 61 years on from that shooting, we now have a situation where it is so normalised that any event will instantly spawn dozens of conspiracy theories. And that's just sort of expected from any big event in the United States, let alone a shooting like this.
What were the reactions to the shooting in the days that followed? Biden obviously had to address it. Our politicians addressed it.
I think there was universal condemnation of what happened from everyone. Obviously, nobody wants political violence. But one of the interesting things that did happen from the Republican side was a number of high-profile Republicans coming out and saying Joe Biden ordered this by describing Trump as an enemy of democracy and that kind of thing, or Joe Biden is responsible for this, that kind of thing. And there's some speculation that J.D. Vance, who has now been named as Donald Trump's vice presidential running mate, his tweets along those lines may have been what pushed him to the top of the pile for consideration for the vice presidential pick, because he instantly came on board, blamed Joe Biden for Joe Biden's rhetoric for causing this shooting. So, and then, of course, there was a wave of discussion about unity and trying to come together and tone down the rhetoric and that kind of thing. That lasted all of about nearly a week. And we're now back to basically where we were before in terms of the way that each party talks about each other. Donald Trump tried to give a unifying speech at the convention, but went off script multiple times to say things about Joe Biden and the Democrats and create and propagate conspiracy theories that there is some sort of a widespread operation to try and take Donald Trump out. One shooting is not going to be enough to turn the United States political environment around into one where people are speaking in a non-violent way.
I think that's a good point to talk more about the shooter, because all of this madness comes down to this one 20-year-old man. Who was Thomas Crooks?
Thomas Crooks was 20, as you say. He was a local. He lived about an hour's drive away from the site. He was a good student at school. There's some debate about the level to which he was bullied at school. Some schoolmates have said that he was mercilessly bullied while he was in high school. Others have said that he wasn't. He was just sort of kept to himself, didn't really interact a lot with others. He, left school. He was living with his parents. He was sort of training in engineering. He worked at a local nursing home in the kitchen to make money. And he was interested in guns. He went to the shooting range. His father, it seems, owned an AR-15 style rifle, which is the rifle that he ended up using to shoot Donald Trump. But from what they can tell, he wasn't a particularly political person. It's not as though they've gone into his house and found, conspiracy boards on the walls or a huge trove of Joe Biden memorabilia or MAGA hats or anything. He's a registered Republican, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a supporter of the Republican Party. It just means that he wants to vote in Republican primaries, which is something that a lot of people might want to do. Friends have said that he was sort of a conservative guy. But then, in search of a motive, people are sort of looking for a political motive. But as the FBI have been going through his phone and his details, they're basically finding evidence of a man who kind of was looking up events from all sorts of people. He was searching not just for Donald Trump events, but for Joe Biden events, searching up where the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, was going to be at any particular time, even searching up where Kate Middleton of the British royal family, her movements, that kind of thing. I think one of the interesting things about this is this man doesn't seem like a traditional 20th century assassin. He doesn't seem like he's been necessarily, radicalized one way or another. He fits the profile more of a school shooter. He seems to be more like the sort of person that increasingly in the 21st century decides to go on a mass shooting in some public place or at a school. You wouldn't necessarily say that people who go to a shopping centre and start shooting at people, or people who go to a movie theatre and start shooting at people, had a problem with the shopping centre or with the movie theatre. This is a person potentially who just wanted to create a massive event, become a notorious person, and saw this as an opportunity to do that, rather than was taken with a desire to kill Donald Trump specifically. That being said, we're still very early on in the investigation, and obviously more information may come out. And in fact, we may never have a clear idea of his motives, but he does seem a lot more like a 21st century school shooter than a Lee Harvey Oswald or a John Wilkes Booth, who seemed like they were radicalized politically, and that's why they made their choices to assassinate people. Whereas it just seems like Thomas Matthew Crooks was a isolated person who decided to do something horrific.
Maybe that's why he was able to get as far as he did, because he wasn't on that security radar. He wasn't kind of putting things on the internet and saying, I hate Trump, I'm going to kill Trump, because his actions were very premeditated. Can you talk us through his movements in the days before the shooting?
So he had been assembling improvised explosive devices at his home. The police and the FBI aren't entirely sure what the purpose of that was, but on the day of the shooting, there were improvised explosive devices in his car. They're not quite sure whether potentially he wanted to use that to create a distraction while the shooting was underway, or create a distraction so he could escape, or something like that. They're not sure what the purpose of those IEDs was. But the day before the shooting, so Friday the 12th of July, he went to his shooting club where he practiced shooting. On Saturday, the day of the shooting, he went to a gun shop 5 minutes from his house, bought 50 rounds of ammunition for an AR-15 style rifle. Then he went to Home Depot, which is their equivalent of Bunnings, to buy a 1.5 metre high metal ladder, and then drove to the site carrying in his Hyundai Sonata the gun, 2 IEDs, and apparently a bulletproof vest and 3 fully loaded bullet magazines. So he's travelled to the site, obviously with a plan to get up on a roof. He's got a ladder. It's actually unclear about whether or not he actually used the ladder. He may have sort of scrambled up an air conditioning unit in order to get onto the roof. But at the site, it's also been reported that he had used a drone to fly over the site just to get a clearer idea of the setup and the situation. So that's where he was when he was arriving, and that's the situation that he was in. And then as he got there, he was sort of, as I said, skulking around, looking at things, checking things out through his rangefinder. And then at some point, he made his move to climb up onto the roof. It seems like he may have made his move to climb up on the roof before Trump arrived, which is an interesting quirk. I mean, being on the roof makes you obviously more visible and more likely to be seen by authorities. And getting up on the roof early is an odd choice. But yes, apparently before Donald Trump took the stage, before he arrived in his limo, he climbed up on the roof. And while he was on the roof, obviously he was seen by law enforcement authorities. He was seen by rally goers. He got into position. And as Donald Trump was speaking and looking at that chart, he fired 3 shots. The Secret Service took 11 seconds after his first shot before they were able to spot him. And it took 15 seconds for the Secret Service counter-snipers to take him out. So the whole thing took 26 seconds from him firing his first shot to him being killed by the Secret Service.
Have we heard from his family?
Not a lot. Neighbours say that they were a quiet family that kept to themselves. They seemed extremely confused about what was going on the day, but they are reportedly fully cooperating with investigators and authorities to try and figure out exactly what happened and why their son did this.
How has this, if it has, affected Trump's campaign? It seems to have benefited him more than anything.
It's one of those situations that perhaps in a normal campaign this would be more measurable. But since Trump was shot, so much has happened. And so many other things have changed about the way the campaign has been going that it's difficult to sort of drill down and isolate what the effect of this shooting will be on voters, whether this is going to add a lot of voters to him. Because remember, obviously, a lot of his own supporters think that the whole situation is extremely incredible and it's wonderful that he was not killed, and many of his supporters saying that he was spared by God, and this is a sign that God wants Donald Trump to return to the presidency. And many other supporters just think that the photo of him with his fist in the air, blood on him, with the Secret Service around him, looks really badass and really cool. But you can't vote for him twice. The people who were already going to vote for him can't vote harder. The question is whether this event will convince people who weren't going to vote for him to vote for him. And I don't know that it's very clear exactly what effect it's going to have on undecided voters. But I would have thought that a change in the Democratic candidate is going to have a much larger effect on the race than the shooting of Donald Trump that took place on the 13th of July.
Yes, obviously the US election is shaping up to be a very, very big news event at the moment. Biden has stepped down. But it does strike me with Trump that he is now able to say he is a victim. And he's always kind of said things like, they're out to get me, and now he kind of has a bit of proof of that.
Well, he was already doing that. He's already a person who has multiple criminal investigations into him, which he says are witch hunts. He has already been, found guilty by a judge of criminal offences. He has been ordered by a different judge to pay $500 million in fines for various other things. He's already a person who has a strong case to make to his supporters, who is able to argue that he's being victimised. One of his things that he likes to say is, they're coming for you and I'm just standing in the way, which obviously, would be potentially bolstered by the fact that he was fired upon. But I don't know that he needed this to bolster that necessarily. It obviously created a bit of excitement and energy in his campaign. The Republican National Convention was, by all accounts, a pretty successful event. But now that the dice have been thrown in the air with the Democrats reshuffling, changing their candidate, Donald Trump has expressed a lot of anger about the fact that he doesn't get to run against Joe Biden anymore. It requires a massive shift in campaign strategy. But I just think that's going to have a much larger effect on the campaign than the shooting.
There's no doubt that there's a lot of tensions, though, and there's a lot of anger on both sides in American politics. Security will be bolstered after this, but
you would hope so.
You'd hope so. But do you think that this is a sign of more violence to potentially come, or is there the potential for copycats?
I mean, obviously, yeah, I think there is. It's just you'd hope that the Secret Service will just increase the perimeter that they are defending protectees from to a significantly larger radius. I think that's the best that they can do. You know, there's so much criticism at the moment of that the building that Thomas Crooks fired from should have been inside the secure zone, but it wasn't. So the Secret Service weren't protecting that building specifically. So you would certainly hope that the perimeter will be increased and that protection around the candidates will be much more secure than before. The interesting thing is previously with Joe Biden being the candidate, Joe Biden wasn't actually doing all that many public events. He wasn't out in public all that much. And so he wasn't particularly difficult for the Secret Service to protect because he just wasn't leaving the White House all that often. Whereas Kamala Harris doesn't have to be at the White House and will potentially have the energy to be out there constantly doing a huge volume of events, none of which will have been planned beforehand. So it's going to be a massive shift in the energy and the intensity of the presidential election campaign between now and November 5th. So it's going to be a really big job for the Secret Service. They absolutely cannot afford any other slip-ups. And this was a really big slip-up. And there's significant calls for resignations or firings at the Secret Service. It's kind of surprising that that hasn't happened already because you could argue it was these people's fault or those people's fault or whatever it was. But, I mean, this is obviously a catastrophic failure by the Secret Service, and they are lucky that Donald Trump was not killed.
Thanks to Matt for assisting us to tell this story. True Crime Conversations is a Mamamia podcast, hosted and produced by me, Gemma Barth, with audio design by Scott Stronach. Our executive producer is Liv Proud. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with another True Crime Conversation.